I want to touch on a interesting concept, which is the concept of being under-muscled. And I want to kind of tie this into my last video, which was looking at Lane Norton's description of a study on muscle protein synthesis. What is under-muscled? So recently I saw a young female who felt that she was overweight. Now, when you step on a scale and you looked at her weight and height, it wasn't really overweight. But when I did bioimpedance studies using a specialized scale, she had a higher range of fat and a lower range of muscle than what I would want or expect from one of my patients. And so the concept here is not a number on a scale. So if I was just to work with her on losing weight, for instance, I would be pushing her to do extreme calorie cuts. And a lot of times she may have gone to another doctor and they would have simply put her on Ozempic, and what would happen with Ozempic? She would lose muscle mass, right? How's that going to play out long term? Well, it's not going to play out very well, because if she loses muscle mass, she will basically lose metabolism. The body doesn't like very quick drops in weight. If you look at the Biggest Loser studies that were done out of Hopkins, when you look at the people that went into the Biggest Loser TV show, their metabolic rate dropped tremendously during their time on the show. And what is interesting is 6 years later, it stayed low. It never returned back to the level it was before. So I don't like getting people to drop a considerable amount of weight, because it could affect their metabolism, or at least a considerable amount of weight in a very quick time period. And the other thing is I want to make sure that they hold on to muscle mass. And so what we want to do in a situation where someone has a higher body fat percentage and isn't necessarily overweight on the scale, or is only slightly weight on the over scale, we want to do something called body recomposition. You'll hear athletes and bodybuilders talk about this as recomp. The idea of recomp is that we're going to turn fat to muscle. Now, you don't technically turn fat to muscle. Fat cells don't turn into muscle. But the idea is that you're going to go at a calorie range that allows you to still be anabolic, to still build muscle and lose fat. And so you may build muscle, lose fat, and weigh the same. You may even gain a little bit of weight, but your body fat percentage drops. And this is a goal I have with many of my patients. Actually, with most of my patients. I don't, with patients that have a lot of weight to lose, especially after surgery or with medicines, they will drop muscle mass in the beginning, but we try very hard to get them to maintain muscle mass. So how to maintain muscle mass? All right, so the number one thing you're going to hear over and over again is protein, protein, protein. Now, where does that come from? Well, again, it goes back to these studies that Lane was referring to. If you eat a high protein meal, especially an animal protein meal, you're going to get higher muscle protein synthesis. Now, here's the question. Does muscle protein synthesis correlate with actual hypertrophy or increased strength? And the answer is not necessarily. There's been several studies looking at this. Just because you were able to increase someone's muscle protein synthesis, especially if you only increase it, with one meal, that's not going to necessarily cause them to be stronger. There's many reasons for this. Muscle protein synthesis is one aspect. Yes, you need to increase muscle protein synthesis in order to gain muscle. But there's another big factor, and it's muscle protein breakdown. And if you're only looking at muscle protein synthesis and you're not looking at muscle protein breakdown, and you're not looking over time, you're not getting an accurate picture. So, for instance, if you look at the muscle protein synthesis from actual doing an acute bout of exercise or lifting weights, is you will actually get more muscle protein breakdown than muscle protein synthesis. So does that mean that lifting weights makes you lose muscle? No, obviously not. During the recovery period and over an extended period of time, you start to build up muscle. In fact, the more you work out, the more dense your muscles will become over time, and that's been studied too. So where am I getting at this? It's really important to maintain muscle mass or gain muscle mass while losing weight. How do you do that? Number one, you do not go on extreme low calorie diets. I typically don't necessarily do calorie counting with patients, but when you're getting to recomp, when you're getting to someone who doesn't need to lose a lot of weight, it's probably a good idea to start looking at calorie. I utilize MyFitnessPal and we enter meals as best we can. And I estimate their metabolic rate using bioimpedance, but you could use something online where you enter your height and weight. Those are not completely accurate, but they'll give you a pretty good idea. And then we multiply that by a factor depending on how active you are, and then you add whatever calories you burn during exercise. And then I try to keep them at about 200 calories below that number, figuring that fat will help make up for the calorie deficit in energy expenditure. And then it's an adjustment game, right? It's a frequently, let's see what you weigh, let's see what your body mass is doing, and let's adjust the calories based on what you're doing, and are you estimating calories correctly, and things like that. So it's a fairly involved process to get to recomp. It's not simply eat less, exercise more. The other thing that's absolutely essential is resistance training. You just simply are not going to get a good body recomp without exercise. You really have to do resistance training. Resistance training is so good for the body. Over the past 10 years, I've gone way more towards resistance training. I used to be all cardio. Now I do cardio too, but I do mainly resistance training. And I feel much healthier because of it. And obviously I've built a lot of muscle mass because of it. Number two, does it matter animal versus plant protein? No, it does not. There's been multiple studies on this. There was a great meta-analysis that looked at this, and there really is not a difference. So you could choose animal or plant protein. I would obviously tend towards plant protein for benefits other than just muscle mass. Then the next question is, do you need to eat a lot of protein? Now this is much harder because everybody's different. If you take a set of twins, multiple sets of twins, and you give everybody the same calorie deficit. So you've got twin group A, twin group B, twin group C. Everybody gets their metabolism measured and everybody goes on a specific diet, let's say 500 calories down from their metabolic rate. Each twin group will lose a different amount of weight. So twin group A, the two twins will lose a similar amount of weight, but that weight might be completely different to group B or to group C. So everybody's body is different in that regard. And the same goes for protein. How your body is going to respond to protein, how much protein you need is a very difficult number to say for sure, because we also have to decide what is need. I mean, do you need enough muscle to compete in a bodybuilding contest, in which case you want to absolutely maximize every bit of muscle you could possibly get? And then the answer is roughly 1.6 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. So if you take what your ideal body weight is and you multiply that by 1.6, that would be probably the maximum amount of protein that's going to make a difference. In other words, going to 1.7 won't give you any more than 1.6. But it's hard to get 1.6 grams per kilogram without having to do protein shakes and stuff like that. What's the difference between doing 1.2 and 1.6? Very little, which is why I say that you need to be very cognizant about what your needs are. Because if your need is to body recomp but not necessarily compete, the differences you're going to see between 1.2 grams per kilogram and 1.6 grams per kilogram is very, very small. And it probably isn't going to make a difference to the non-competitive athlete. Personally, for myself, I do about 1 gram per kilogram because I'm not trying to compete. I'm just trying to be healthy. I don't, this is a whole different topic I could talk about later, but I don't think that protein is necessarily good to overstimulate, as it does stimulate the mTOR process of aging. So I stick at about 1 gram per kilogram. I continue to make gains constantly through my years. I'm still hitting PRs on multiple different weights, and so I've been able to body recomp with that. So what I typically do with my patients is kind of assess. I do see people that don't eat enough protein, and to me you need to at least, at the very least, get the RDA. So you need to get 0.8 grams per kilogram ideal body weight. Typically, if we're really going to do resistance training, I up that to 1 gram per kilogram body weight for protein. And then we focus on about a 200 calorie deficit in the beginning and then just monitor what the results are after that. So it's a fairly complex task, but it's not as simple as what you see in social media, which basically states, just eat a lot of protein and that'll do it. Because we've got a study by the meat industry that shows that muscle protein synthesis is stimulated by eating protein. That is not the long-term outcome we're looking for. We want to know, does muscle increase and does strength increase, and can you get it to increase on lower doses without having to do really super high doses? And the answer is yes.